We're going to start off today's session with a talk by Mr. Saad Rizvi, who is a serial entrepreneur. He's an investor, he's a lecturer, and he's also an author. He currently leads strategy for emerging products at Facebook. This is huge. And he is the co-founder of Delivery Associates and was the founder and CEO of Mentat, backed by Y Combinator, which helped accelerate employment outcomes for job seekers. Today, he's going to be talking about building a corporate accelerator. This should be really interesting. Once again, welcome to 021Disrupt 2020. I'm Minushe. Let's begin our talks and our session this morning, starting off with Mr. Saad Rizvi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Saad Rizvi. Really excited to be here to talk to you today. Just wanting to make sure that everyone can see my slides. And I can, yep, there you go. So my name is Saad Rizvi. Really excited to be here. Today, I'm going to talk about corporate innovation, in particular, corporate venture capital, corporate incubators, and what it really means for startups and how they should interact with them. So quick introduction on why I'm here to talk about that. I've been building corporate incubators and corporate ventures for a long time. I started out by building a corporate venture fund at Pearson. It was focused on the education technology market and a $60 million fund that invested all over the world. After that, went and started my own company, Mentat, which I experienced an incubator by participating in Y Combinator. And also started Delivery Associates, which is a government technology company still active. And currently, I'm heading up strategy for emerging products at Facebook, work across Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram. And I'm also a venture partner at Pioneer Fund, which invests in early stage companies, including a couple of companies based out of Pakistan, which I'm really excited about. But beyond that, I'm also a nestling. I've been lucky to be friends with both entrepreneurs in Nest as well as the leadership of Nest, and it's been amazing to see what this organization has been contributing to the Pakistan startup ecosystem, and I've been proud to be a part of that. So let's start with why do corporates need to innovate? Now, there's been a very interesting trend around corporate innovation and the life of corporates. If you look back to 70 years ago in 1950s, and you look at the top 500 companies in the States, which are called the S&P 500 companies, the average lifespan of a S&P 500 company was 60 years. Fast forward to now, the average lifespan of a S&P 500 company is less than 20 years. Now, that basically means that companies are not lasting as long as they would in the past, and they actually have to innovate or they die. They don't have a choice. They have to innovate. And perhaps the person who put it best is the famous professor Clayton Christensen, who in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, has this sentence which stood out to me, which says the same practices that lead the business to be successful in the first place eventually can also result in their demise. So unless big companies innovate and find ways of engaging with startups and driving innovation, they really won't survive. And that's becoming more and more apparent as technology progresses. So how can corporates innovate? There's, as part of my new role, I looked at what are all the different ways in companies all over the world drive innovation through them. And it really becomes apparent that people in large companies innovate along a spectrum of innovation that's very core to the business and very core to the day-to-day bread and butter aspects of what a company does, all the way down to really innovative, crazy things that are far away from the bread and butter of a company. And there's a bunch of different options that lie along that spectrum. I'm going to talk about those options and zoom in on a couple of them. So when you look at things which are really core to the business, that's basically the bread and butter corporate innovation that you see all over the world and that everyone's familiar with. This includes things like investing in R&D to develop new products inside the company. Some companies have internal innovation funds. Some companies like Google also set aside, a certain amount of time for employees to go and innovate and work on things on their free time. And so those are things which are basically around innovating when it relates to the core product. It also includes things like traditional corp dev and partnerships. So every large corporation has a corporate development department that's doing things like IP licensing, patents, mergers and acquisitions, some investments through the business units, and some joint corporate ventures. So this is basically like when you're core to the corporate, these are the kind of things you deploy to innovate. Now, things get interesting when we start moving away from the core and started looking at ideas that are away from the bread and butter of the business. And the two new types of innovation that I'm seeing is firstly, new business incubation. This is when a corporation sets up a bespoke innovation unit that starts with generating the next big hit or generating the next big tech product within the company. Sometimes these are dedicated internal teams that sit far away from the business unit so that they have space to innovate. Sometimes it's a hybrid team, like some corporates set up a team outside the company that interfaces with startups. And we're going to talk more about that. The other interesting trend that we are seeing is investing based innovation. So corporates, are not returning the profits to shareholders, but redeploying some of those profits to drive or purchase some innovation. And this includes in-house incubators, in-house venture funds, and also some passive LP investments, which I'll talk about as well. And then finally, like when startups want to go and do stuff that's kind of out there, they sometimes try to innovate through partnerships. And this could include funding research networks, setting up product development networks such as hackathons, setting up innovation prizes like the X Prize, which many of you have heard of, or having open source innovation, which basically involves contributing to open source efforts, whether it's open source software development or it's open standards and initiatives such as standardized telecom infrastructure and standardized tech infrastructure. So there's a spectrum of innovation and types of things which corporates can do. Which one of these they pick really depends on the corporation strategy and what they're trying to get out of this. And if you map these to kind of like the tech companies and the companies in the Bay Area, at least, you see them not choosing one of these, but basically deploying 5 or 6 out of these menu of innovation opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit more about which one of these we're doing at Facebook. So just talking a little bit more about new business incubation. New business incubation can either happen through an internal team that a corporate sets up or a hybrid team. Facebook, Google, Nike, many corporations have these internal teams, which are dedicated people who have nothing to do with the core part of the business, but sit aside and are operating like startups and figuring out new products that the company should develop. These type of units are only successful if they focus on areas where there's an unfair advantage to a company. So for example, Google has this group called Area 120, and they work on a bunch of digital products that build on top of Google's assets. Same with Facebook's group, same with Nike group. And you really need to have clear decision-making guidelines as a corporation for this group to be successful, because it's there's a lot of tailwinds against these type of groups. Other corporates decide to have hybrid teams. This means that they set up groups outside of a corporation, and they partner with startups. They partner with other corporations and try to kind of like have new startups working outside of a company. BCG does that. Prehype does that. AI Fund does that, and they basically like set up to attract really innovative talent, which corporates have a hard time attracting, because some of the best talent would go and start their own companies. But I'm seeing the rise of these hybrid teams as well. Now, when it comes to incubation and innovation, through investing, I'm seeing three types of models: the passive LP model, the in-house incubator, and the active corporate venture capital fund. The passive LP model is the one where a corporate doesn't directly invest into startups, but they become LPs or limited partners in existing venture capital fund. So Tencent, for example, this major corporation, its entire innovation strategy is through being a passive LP in a lot of different VC funds. And through that, a corporation is able to invest in hundreds and hundreds of companies and get a lot of learnings from a large number of companies. The other way corporates innovate is sometimes they have in-house incubators. Probably the most popular one is the series run by Techstars in partnership with Barclays, Target, Ford, and a bunch of other companies. And this is when a corporate invests in a bunch of companies as a cohort, guides them through like a 3-month traditional incubator, results in a demo day, and gives them access to partnerships. And then increasingly, there's this rise of corporate venture capital. Like corporate venture capital has now become a huge force globally. I know there's also the rise of corporate venture capital in Pakistan, which I'm pretty excited by. But this is basically a VC group within a corporation that's making either strategic or investment return driven investments. And pretty much every major company has one of these, some of these groups. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the ones I've learned some interesting things from. Here, the really core thing is corporate venture capital has to focus on companies which actually want corporate venture capital. The best startups often have a lot of options and they can pick and choose who they take money from. And sometimes these startups don't take money from corporates because they're worried about, the idea being stolen or being in competition with the corporation. So really, these corporate venture capital funds are successful if they focus on areas where they can provide an unfair advantage to the startup that they invest in. Now, driving a little bit deeper into what I'm seeing in corporate venture capital. Firstly, as I was saying, it's everywhere now. Here are just some companies that have set up and launched corporate venture capital groups over the last 10 years. You see every major tech company, you see some of them multiple times. So Google has 4 or 5 different corporate venture capital divisions. Salesforce has several divisions as well. So it's really taking off, and a lot more companies are directly investing into startups, which is great because startups now have more options to choose from. The other interesting thing is there's been a shift in corporate venture capital becoming more startup friendly. Previously, corporates would just make pure strategic investments just to meet their commercial objectives. They wouldn't care about the startups at all. They would have all these like restrictions and rules against startups that were not really beneficial to the smaller companies and were more focused on just like extracting value for the corporate. But recently, there's been a shift, and corporate venture capital has had to adapt. And so they've had to adapt by building relationships with startups because their reputation matters. They've had to adapt by having a dedicated investing team that's focusing on helping startups. They've become more founder friendly. They've focused more on financial returns. And they've had new information firewalls so that a corporate can't just like take a startup's idea and build it inside, but have some delineation between the startup investing world and the corporate core business world. So that's a great move for startups, and it's a kind of like a wake-up call for corporates. So if you do want to do corporate venture capital, you have to adapt this way, and you have to be a good player that's adding value to the startup ecosystem. Now, just quickly, I'm going to talk about the type of things I've been doing at Facebook. And at Facebook, we've been approaching innovation through a bunch of different things. And I'm going to talk about a few of those. So in the emerging products aspect, I've been working on 3 different types of things: building new products, investing in products, and hacking. So the first one of these is building. And the build part of corporate innovation at Facebook is basically around creating new standalone app experiences that are separate from the core products that you've heard of, like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and so on. And you can try out some of the new products Facebook has launched. It includes, Venue, which is like a companion app to live events. It includes Forecast, which is an app for forecasting trends. It includes eggs, which is like a website builder. So we've been building a bunch of standalone experiences that kind of can stand on their own and become new apps in the future. Facebook has been very actively investing in a bunch of companies as well. Here's an example of a major investment that happened in June in Indonesia's Gojek, alongside Google and Tencent. As I'm sure you can see, Facebook and Google and all these companies have been making a lot of investments in Asia as well, but also all over the world. And I've been looking at investments as well. And then finally, we've been launching hackathons in partnership with other providers. So back in March, we launched a hackathon to tackle the effects of COVID, which had 18,000 innovators join from 175 countries. And we launched a bunch of products in partnership with the WHO that helped improve kind of government's response to coronavirus. And so, as I was saying earlier, there's like a lot of different ways corporates are innovating. We at Facebook have been looking at some of those, and I have been doing a bunch of different initiatives in parallel. Now, startups. Should you partner with a CVC or incubator associated with a large corporate? There's a lot of good reasons to do that. Firstly, you get access to growth partnerships in a bunch of areas. So a lot of large companies by nature have crazy distribution to thousands of customers, if not millions, and you can get access to that distribution network. The other thing is sometimes if you take money from a corporation, you can command higher valuations than if you did from a traditional VC fund, because you also add strategic value to that corporation. You get access to expertise. If you're building a machine learning startup, by partnering with a corporation which has like 1,000 people working on that, you can get access to like really good expertise in your subject area. And you have a pathway to acquisition. Often acquisitions start out as partnerships and investments, and it can help you get your foot in the door to get acquired down the line if that's what you're aiming for. At the same time, you have to be really careful. You can't just approach corporate partnerships without thinking it through. Deals with corporations take a much longer time than they do with a traditional VC fund. So you have to be patient. You need a lot of internal champions and a lot of internal stakeholders to align and basically support your case. You have to be careful of copycats. Do your due diligence. There's some corporations which are notorious for investing in startups and copying their ideas. You have to be careful that you're partnering with the right corporation and the right person inside the corporation. And then finally, it can't be your only strategy. So, it takes a long time to get corporate deals through. You can't rely on them as your only approach. Treat it as a nice to have, and treat it as just like you would treat an outbound sales process. Talk to a bunch of corporations, find one that's a good fit for you, and negotiate good terms for yourself. Now, if you're a corporate, what should you do to innovate? Firstly, you need to actively start working on it, or you'll get disrupted. It used to be a nice to have to do all of these things to drive corporate innovation. It's become a necessity now, and by not doing anything, you're choosing not to participate in innovation. So really, corporates need to actively invest and start working on this. There's no one size fits all. As I said at the start, there's a ton of different things which you can do to drive innovation. You have to look at the menu of options, find which ones kind of fit your strategy. Do you want this stuff to be core to your existing product base, or do you want to do something that's out there and far away, and really focus on executing well? Because that's coming up with a strategy is just 1% of the work. It's how well you execute on it. And then the other thing that's really important is to contribute to the startup ecosystem, not just extract value from it. Increasingly, it's become really important to be a good citizen in the startup ecosystem. You should help startups, you should invest in them, you should help entrepreneurs, and really build the entire ecosystem, because that's what you need to do to get good results in the long term. But it's definitely possible. Many corporations have built successful innovation and corporate venture units, and you can do it too. Well, that's all I had from my side. Would love to take any questions if there's anything from the group.